Thank you. The time is 10:04. Today is Friday, August the 14th, 2015. And we will call this meeting of the Texas Appraiser Licensing and Certification Board to order. First item of business is the Pledges of Allegiance, which Mr. Brian Padden has agreed to lead us in.
Stand. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible.
Next item on our agenda is a roll call.
Chair Jamie Wycliffe.
Present.
Lori Fontana.
Here.
Mark McAnally.
Present.
Walker Beard.
Here.
Clayton Black. Patrick Carlson. Jesse Barba.
Present.
Brian Padden.
Here.
Jim Jeffers.
Here.
Chair will accept a motion for the excused absence of Mr. Clayton Black, who was actually here in Austin, made the trip, but got ill and is not able to be with us this morning, and then Mr. Carlson, who has a business conflict. If someone would just say, I move to accept those absences, please.
I move that we accept the absentees.
I second it.
Thank you. We have a motion from Mr. McAnally and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Next, we have in our agenda public comments. This is an opportunity for a member of the public to comment on any item that is not currently on our agenda for action today. Is there anyone that would like to address the board? Seeing none, I'll go ahead and make an announcement. My intention is to move the agenda around a bit today. The hope is that it allows for increased efficiency. As it's currently set, we would immediately open this agenda and then go into executive session, which is, I think, inconvenient for our traveling guests. So I'm going to try and align our executive session with a potential lunch break, allowing the visiting audience to take a lunch break while we're in executive session and return. In that vein, I believe that we're going to move items 4, 5, and 6 to after, say, an 11:30 time frame. I anticipate when we break, and I'll make the official announcement then, that it'll take us about 45 days. So 45 days. Ooh, man alive. If it takes us 45 days, y'all just go on home and come back. I apologize, 45 minutes. We're going to move to committee reports, and again, I'd like to propose a bit of a change. I think it might be more efficient if we make the committee report and then actually take up the action item that's later in our agenda, so we don't have to open it, talk about it, and then later come back and actually take our actions. So as it relates to that, when we open like item number 8, which is the AMC Advisory Committee report, I'd like to take up the forms conversation on agenda item number 24. But again, as we get there, I will try and help keep us on track. And I'll probably need help in light of the fact that I've made 2 misstatements already today. So, Kristen, I'll ask you to kind of try and keep me on track as well so that we don't miss anything. Is that acceptable to the board? Make the agenda changes? Okay. We're going to move then to agenda item number 8, report by the AMC Advisory Committee. And then following the report, we will open agenda item 24, which relates to that particular report.
The AMC Advisory Committee met on, goodness gracious, I have lost my dates. Where are my dates?
Number 9.
I know, it was 2 weeks ago.
That's good enough.
2 weeks ago. The advisory committee consists of me, Lori Fontana, Chair, Sarah Oates, and Lawrence McNamara, which are public members. There was staff in attendance and also some public attendance. The committee discussed several items, including a newly adopted federal rules regarding AMCs, possible changes to definition of review and scope of work, and the revisions to AMC application and renewal forms. The committee also continued discussion of the process and format of AMC compliance audits. The committee is considering proposed changes to Rules 159.155 as drafted by Mrs. Oates, a committee member, and has tabled that for discussion in future meetings. We have not set a future meeting date as of yet, but it will be set in the next couple of weeks and posted. And then we're going to move to agenda item number 24.
I guess I'd first ask, are there any questions about the AMC report?
Madam Chair, Kristen Warman, General Counsel for the Board. Just to clarify the record, there is an error in the report. The committee met on July 24th, 2015. That was a Friday afternoon.
My memory just wasn't that good.
And the report inaccurately states the teleconference was on August 14th, which is today's date.
Okay, so we'll note that correction for the record of the actual meeting date. And yes, Ms. Fontana, I think the next most efficient thing to do is then for us to take up corresponding agenda item number 24.
Madam Chair and board members, Kristen Warman, General Counsel. Before you in agenda item 24 are several forms that the AMC committee is recommending revisions to based on trying to clarify the information that staff needs to obtain from the AMC as it relates to carrying out our function to perform criminal background checks on owners of AMCs and their primary contacts. The changes, the proposed revisions are highlighted on each form and shows the information and the calculation that we are requesting from the AMC applicants, both on the application for registration as well as the renewal of registration for AMCs. In addition to those two forms, we have proposed revisions to the AMC owner primary contact background history form. This is a complete revision of this form to bring it into the updated format so that it is a fillable Adobe PDF form. The AMC committee has reviewed all of the forms and the proposed revisions and recommends the board adopt the proposed revisions, and staff recommends the board adopt the revised forms as presented.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, I move that that staff is authorized on behalf of the board to revise the application for registration as an AMC, renewal of registration as an AMC, and AMC owner primary contact background history as recommended by AMC Advisory Committee.
I'll second it.
A motion by Ms. Fontana, second by Mr. Beard. Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Is anyone opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Now we will go to agenda item number 9, which is the report by the Budget Committee.
Madam Chair, the Budget Committee met this morning at 8:30. Present myself, and then by phone was Patrick Carlson and Clayton Black, both committee members, and the Commissioner and Legal Counsel. The budget as presented is substantially the same as was presented at the last board meeting. The committee did recommend and presented a motion and approved a motion to accept the budget to the board for acceptance. And an additional motion was made as it pertains to agenda item number 23 that we'll be getting into. That is the long-term building plan feasibility.
Thank you. Is there any questions about the actual report from the Budget Committee? And I just, for the record, say that I've popped into that, I was in and out of that meeting, as was Ms. Fontana. None of us present all at the same time, but there were some questions asked by other board members at that Budget Committee meeting as well. So let's open agenda items number 22 and 23. They will correspond to the report that was just given.
Madam Chair and board members, Commissioner Doug Oldmixon, you have before you a two-page budget as well as 4 pages that represent, or excuse me, 5 pages that represent the report on the long-term facilities master plan. And so I'm going to go through the budget itself, make a few comments, answer any questions that any board member has, and then we'll move to the second page, which includes the reserves. And when we get to the reserve for long-term facilities master plan, then I will refer to the other 5 pages that are the supporting documentation for that recommendation as well. Okay. So you will notice on page 1 of the budget that the salary and wages line item is actually reduced by $94,500. This represents the loss of 2 positions in the enforcement division, which the remaining staff of the division have assured me to my satisfaction, and I assure you, that they're able to handle the current workload without replacing those positions. And so, while that has a credit effect, obviously the budget has gone down. I want to also assure you that in that number, even though it's less, there are also raises for all of the staff, including the 2.5%. So it's above, the raises are above 2.5%, but it includes the 2.5% legislative mandate that although we are an independent agency and are not required to adhere to all of those, we do need to do the same to remain competitive. Now, in this particular instance, and we've done that for the past 2 years as well, we have met or exceeded the legislative mandates for state employees, payroll adjustments. In this case, the 2.5% that was mandated by the legislature is actually offset by an increase in the individual employees' contributions to their retirement fund. So that's that absorbs the majority of that 2.5%. So we have implemented raises over and above that 2.5% as well. And if this budget is approved, those will go into effect on September the 1st. You'll see that the employee benefits has increased, and there is also a change to stabilize the retirement fund. Agencies are assessed an additional 2% contribution towards the retirement fund of each individual employee. So that's why that has gone up. The other personnel costs has gone down. The elimination with the increase in base compensation, the elimination of the performance incentive plan that we had used in the past, is taken out of there. There's three items that, well, first of all, any personnel-related questions, okay, or compensation or benefits. There are three items. Under professional services, you'll see there's a reduction of $9,000, and the note says eliminated some IT services. If you look down further, under the supplies and equipment category, there's a reduction of about $4,300, and the note says PC refresh budget moved to equipment lease. And if you look at the equipment lease rental line item, you'll see that that's increased by $5,638. So all of that taken into account is a credit. All of that together is a reduction in costs, and that is brought about by a couple of initiatives from our IT department. We have ceased purchasing both hardware and the software that resides on it for desktop network support or network functions. So at each desktop, that will be replaced now by a computer that is leased, and that leased computer will come loaded with all of the standard MS Office and some other operating software, and that is also leased, and so there's a support function that goes along with that. We no longer purchase the computers, we no longer purchase the software. Both of those are leased to us with a warranty, a maintenance warranty in place, and the combination of that gives us better equipment that's renewed every 3 years with current software, none of which we have to purchase. Okay, and so that combination actually saves us money. Any questions about that? Okay. So on balance, one other thing I wanted to point out is under contract services, you'll see there's a reduction of about $12,500, and that is principally for decreased costs related to SOA hearings. Because of the re-engineering over the past few years of our complaint management process, we have fewer opportunities to have to go to SOA. Because our complaints are managed in a way that reaches resolution. The objective being, of course, unless there's evidence of intentional or grossly negligent misbehavior, we want a better educated appraiser to come out the other side of every legitimate complaint that's filed, and so this board, working with its enforcement committee and the staff, has adopted those changes, and the result has been far fewer cases going to SOA, and so we can reduce our estimated costs related to that. That takes care of the expense side comments that I wanted to make. If you'll turn now to the bottom of that page 1 is the revenue. You will recall that last year we reduced licensing fees for appraisers, and so you'll see there's a reduction in the licensing fee projected revenue as well. So that represents both the numbers of license holders as well as the reduced fees. In the AMC line item, we again try to be very conservative with our estimates. If we look back at the total number of AMCs that have initially registered with us and the number that renewed at their first 2-year anniversary, we renewed about 80%. About 80% continued. And so based on that hard number, we're projecting going forward a repetition of that same percentage. So the new AMCs that have come on since then, we're projecting they will renew at an 80% rate, and those who have already renewed, that will be in their second renewal cycle, that they'll be 80%. So we believe that to be very conservative. And so that shows revenue from license renewals and also their panelists are renewed at the same time. And as you recall, we have an imbalance because the majority of AMCs registered in 1 year. And so in the second year was a much smaller cohort. And so we take that revenue and then spread it evenly across the 2 years because our administrative expenses are relatively flat between the 2 years. And so that's the line item credit at the bottom that says AMC revenue carry forward. There's a $290,000 that's carried into the next year budget. Administrative penalties is an estimate based on a decline of administrative penalties. Last year was about $50,000, excuse me, FY 2014, about $50,000 and about $48,000 projected for this year, so we're projecting $45,000 for next year. So that produces a budget with a $65,527 projected surplus if everything was exactly as projected by the budget. Any questions on the revenue? All right. Then if you will look at page 2, the first 2 sections at the top simply reconcile the available cash with our projected expenses through the end of the fiscal year. And so the middle of the page where there's an asterisk next to projected cash balance August 31st, 2015 is a little over $1 million. Now of that, we have a reserve policy, an operational reserve policy adopted by this board to reserve up to 4 months worth of our average operating expenses, and so that $515,000 represents 4 months of expenses based on the 2016 projected budget. So that's about half of the reserve, half of our cash is reserved for operations and contingencies. In addition, this body adopted 2 additional reserves, a reserve for educational development. We'll talk about that first. At the end of fiscal 2014, we dedicated to that reserve all of the administrative penalties that were collected in the prior year. Okay? And you may recall that as a part of SB 1007, beginning January 1st of 2016, that is a statutory dedication on a go-forward basis. So while this board adopted that dedication by policy and is carrying through with that recommendation for our FY15 collected administrative penalties, that's the next line item, 2016, that will be done by legislation. So right now, those 2 line items show the current balance, essentially the prior year's dedication, and then the estimate of what the administrative penalties will be by the August 31st of this year, about $55,000. And that's an estimate, so it will actually reflect our, when we get to reports, you'll see the actual amount that has been collected so far. So those 2 combined, about $105,000 would be in that reserve as of September 1. The only authorized expense from that reserve so far is the payment of to the University of Houston. Contractually, we contracted with them to conduct an update to the fee study. And so they accomplished that between November and February of last year, and that was published in March. That is available on our website for both appraisers and AMCs to evaluate, to determine for themselves whether the fees that they receive or pay are customary and reasonable. Any questions about that reserve?
Commissioner, I have a question, and
Yes, sir.
On the administrative penalties on the first page, we're projecting through August of 2015 $48,055. Should that sync up exactly with that one, that 55,155, or is that two different things?
Yeah, I apologize. That is what has been collected in that category. That's actually what's been collected through the end of June.
Okay.
So the amount, the difference between that 48,055 and the 55,155 is an estimate of what would be collected in July and August.
Great, thanks.
Okay. Although the header would lead you to believe that that was included a projection, it's an actual. Okay, then the second reserve is the long-term facilities master plan reserve. And at the end of last year, this board dedicated $240,000 of its available cash to that reserve. And we are recommending, as a part of this budget, to dedicate an additional $180,000 to that reserve, bringing that reserve balance to $420,000. Now, out of that, the only authorized expense so far is the board's pro rata portion of the feasibility study, which we paid the Facilities Commission to conduct on our behalf, of $24,800. The pro rata portion being about $3,400, I think it was. That was the board's portion of that. The balance was paid by the commission. So let me turn, I'll just finish briefly. The last section there has FY 2016 activity, and that basically just takes our current cash position with the reserves and then projects, if we had all of the revenues and expenses precisely as shown on page 1, what would our position be this time next year? And then would there be any available monies to dedicate to reserves? So statutorily, the reserve for education development would be up by $45,000. That's the allocation in the budget for administrative penalty revenues. And then there would be an available amount of about $25,000 over our 4-month operating reserve that could be dedicated to the long-term facilities master plan. Okay, that's what that shows. So under agenda item 23, and because it's integral to the budget, I went over in detail with the budget committee this morning the progress so far on the feasibility study and then the path forward that that will be part of this recommendation, part of the recommendation that came out of the Budget Committee and staff recommendation for adoption of the budget and the way forward on continuing the feasibility study process. So when that time comes, I think we'll need 2 different motions for that. But if you'll look at the papers that I gave you, and we'll just start with the ground floor. We asked, as a part of the feasibility study, there were really two components to it. One is, can we actually build a building on the lot that's available that meets our space needs? And so to fulfill that part of the study, the Facilities Commission contracted with an architect to do a massing study. So the massing study just determines what's the available maximum square footage, given the height restrictions, setback requirements, all of those kinds of things. What's the maximum amount that we can fit on that lot? And it's a building that has about 26,800 square feet, about 24,400 on the second main floor, and 2,400 on the bottom floor, which just consists of a lower lobby. And then there's also 60 parking spaces, parking spaces in a ground floor facility, parking facility. So that's what that first schematic shows a proposed layout, if you will, for the building and what would be included on that floor. If If you move to the second page, that is the single office floor of the building, so the second floor of the building above the parking, and this is not to say how this floor would be designed. It's really just to show that all of the elements can fit. Okay, so I asked them. I said, I need a main commission hearing room, board hearing room, with a 10-person dais, so everybody can be at one dais, and seating about 150 people, which is a little, it's about the same size as this room. And so how much space would that take up? So they put that there, and I said, I need conference rooms, one that seats 40 people, one that seats 30 people, and two that seat 20 people. I need 32 individual offices, and I need 84 individual workstations. Can you fit all that with utilities and bathrooms and all those kinds of things? And so they laid it out, and of course an elevator and stairs and fire exits and all that good stuff, and they laid it out just to show that, yes, we can fit all of that in 24,800 square feet. And so that's what that schematic shows. Now, I apologize for those of you who received the copies of a copy, because it's probably not very evident what you're looking at, but there are 2 pages that just show a computer rendering of what the building would look like if built generally to contain what was designed on the first 2 pages. And so there's a couple of pictures there to just show how the building would sit on the lot and what it would look like with its neighbors. You can see the Capitol in the distance, and Cambridge Towers to the right and or to the west, and the Bob Bullock History Museum to the east, and of course to the north is the UT Mall up to the fountain and the tower. So that's the view, if you will, and of course the meeting room is right there on that northern end. So now to the business part of it. Page 5 there contains several columns. The third column in is the Facilities Commission estimate, and then if you skip over a column to the right, you'll see the notes to justify each of those estimates. In between those is a revised estimate of what those costs would be, and that is based on Mr. Brian Padden, the board member, and Mr. Troy Alley, a commission member, and myself met to go over the Facilities Commission estimate and made some adjustments. You'll see that last column on the right is our notes that shows how we got to those numbers. And so essentially the bottom line is there that the Facilities Commission initially estimated it could cost up to about $15.5 million to develop this facility, and the site and the facility, and we believe that that cost is actually much closer to $12 million, that it could be done adequately within a $12 million budget. So that's the initial phase of our review of their estimate. We have not yet received the clearance to continue to proceed. That's a part of this presentation, is a request for authorization to continue to proceed down the feasibility study and to spend some money. If you will notice in that middle column, we have spent for the feasibility study $24,800. If you continue down that column, I have highlighted in the FY16 column 3 line items, one for environmental, $8,000, one for geotechnical, $18,000, and one for survey, $10,000. That would be the authorized expenditures if we continue the feasibility study to determine whether or not there are any easements on the property that would change the development scenario significantly. Are there any environmental conditions that could impact the development of the property, and are there soil conditions that would impact the construction on the property? And so those are the next 3 line items that we would like to have included in your authorization to go forward. We would spend those dollars. This is, as you recall, only, I think it's a 93 or 94 and 6 or 7 the percent split. So the commission pays 93% or 94%, somewhere right in there, and the board actually pays 6 or 7% of those costs. So we're not talking about a huge financial impact to either agency. I think that's all the information I wanted to present to you, but I do want to answer any questions that you have. This is we are at a very preliminary stage, but we believe that everything is promising so far. There are lots of moving parts, and they all have to line up. But if we don't continue down the path, we won't know whether we can align them all or not.
Commissioner, I know you told us, but I got 2 questions, or two subjects. The land, we don't purchase it, do we lease it?
We would lease it, long-term lease.
Do a ground lease.
Yes.
That's all, that's in this.
Cost estimate for the ground lease is not included in these construction cost estimates.
This is just construction costs.
Correct.
Built into our, so we have a payment schedule at the bottom, then that would be plus the payment of the ground lease.
Correct. The negotiations for the ground lease, we believe, just based on preliminary conversations with the Facilities Commission, that we could get a very, very nominal cost for the ground lease based on their ability to, as property manager, that's part of the conversation, as property manager, to generate additional income from the property that isn't currently generated. So right now, it's just a state parking lot, and it doesn't generate any income. But as a developed facility, there are numerous opportunities for them to generate income from the property, and that would be a part of their management agreement, some revenue sharing of those opportunities where they would up to a certain threshold, be able to keep all the income that they generate, and beyond that, there would be some revenue sharing.
That was my next question, or ask you to elaborate on a little bit, is the ability to lease out the parking lot or the patios around the building at game times or whatever.
Correct.
That all go into, will that come back to this body, or just go directly to the state as a part of the ground lease?
To be negotiated. So I believe that there would be a threshold above which there could be some revenue sharing. So we'll see how creative they can be. There are other things that are also not included in here. Rainwater capture, solar panels, all those kinds of things that have the ability to, while there is additional capital up front, to reduce operating costs, so that there is a net positive over time.
Commissioner, I think you've done a good job of giving us a briefing, but of course there are a ton of questions.
There are.
Is our subcommittee participating in the exterior look, interior design conversations? Or is that something that the consultant's just providing to us with no technical input from us except for your baseline needs?
We have not yet reached that stage where, so I believe that that absolutely there are some additional stakeholders, meaning all of the people who will work there, as well as the commissioners and board members, who will want input into what both the interior and the exterior, design portion look like. We're not yet at the place where those conversations are beginning to be engaged.
Okay. Oftentimes when I start a project from the ground up, the folks that are actually doing the analysis get some kind of input from the person ordering the report. So I'm just trying to understand how much input's been given at this point. I think you've answered that question. I would assume the same holds true as it relates to the business end, the estimates. Obviously, we've got a subcommittee member that's capable of taking a look at those and understanding how they look as it relates to the real world. Is the subcommittee assembling and actually looking at those, or are those just being provided at this point?
We did meet to look at them. And all we had to go on was the information that had been provided by the Facilities Commission along with their supporting documentation. So their rationale, which their notes are summarized on this document here, and then the experience of the individuals involved, the individuals on the subcommittee, with recent comparables, if you will. And so those things were brought to bear on the adjustments that are offered here on this display. So yes, that will continue. And of course, each of those will get more and more in depth as the design gels, after we get through the first hurdles of are there any showstoppers.
Which brings me to my next question. Who's doing the rent versus own analysis? And I know you had to have this much information before you could actually, you had to at least get the baseline, but is there someone actually anticipating or preparing one of those?
We will do that.
Okay. And then my final question, then I'll open the floor, and I apologize for asking so many stacked questions. But in my real-world experience, the timing of the soil and the environmental that we're about to move to, I would certainly hope we would be anticipating doing those very much on the front end before we spend huge additional consulting dollars in case we do find a showstopper.
That is anticipated in the recommendation that we're asking for today. That in fact we spend all of those dollars before we take any further steps.
And we know factually that the resource that we would be doing the ground lease with does not have that information?
They do not. Okay. They have a survey, but they have said that they need to update it. And of course, they don't have any soil studies and they don't have any environmental study.
And I would, as a final comment, I would say I'm getting increasingly interested in taking a look at what the proposal for the ground lease looks like so that we can have the other primary component associated with doing the rent versus own analysis. And I apologize for asking so many questions in a row. Are there other questions?
Yes, ma'am.
Sir.
Commissioner, of course, we know firsthand that there's been many different proposed projects on that piece of property. And we also know that the adjoining landowners are also very interested in the outcome, whether it's be a sale, ground lease, development, whatever. But they also are very, very interested in what is put on the property and how it's put on there. And I would hope that we've already had those discussions with them. If we don't have that discussion with them, we need to have that discussion, Madam Chair, before we even expend any type of soil surveys or anything like that. We need to have the adjoining landowners on board with what we're doing. Because outside of that, there's been a lot of money spent on that parking lot out there, and it's been trumped every time.
The adjoining landowners, are they state agencies or are they individuals, or do you know?
No, they're individuals.
And so you're saying that they would weigh in at a city approval level or something that would blockade some desire to use the real estate, potentially?
They are very interested in how that property, if it ever is ever developed, in what manner it would be developed.
And I guess and I realize that we can't speak to what might happen in the future based on what's happened in the past, but is the previous experience that they simply don't desire anything above a ground level on the site, or is there something more specific?
There's been numerous ideas floated that would tie this conversation down quite a while. Okay. But I'm just saying that there's people that live next door to that. We start board testing, we start surveying. They'll find out something's going on. So I would hope that we would just have that discussion with them and get them on board prior to even expending that money.
And I appreciate the comment. I simply want to add to that. I'm not sure that you can achieve that end result if your recommendation would be only until we get our adjoining property owner to say yes. I don't know how you get from point A to point B without taking a few steps in between. But I do fully agree with you. You probably should be engaging the conversation.
Oh, certainly.
And I'll just add, because I know that Mr. McAnally, because of his position at the GLO, is well aware of the history of this unique parcel. So is the Facilities Commission that has control of it. And in fact, our early discussions included that very topic, which is not only are there significant height restrictions, there are other considerations from the surrounding landowners that need to be taken into account. And the Facilities Commission believes, as a part of this feasibility study, that this development fits within all of those constraints.
Thank you.
Okay. But duly noted that those conversations will have to happen, absolutely. Any other questions? Okay.
As I understand
Thank
it, we
you.
probably need to take up two different items for potential action. One would be the actual budget, the proposed budget, and then I suppose other separate and apart would be this building issue. Is that the comment that you made earlier, Commissioner, that you feel like they need to be two separate items?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair,
let's
if we
take-
could just take them in the reverse order, because as I understand them, the motion to expend the money would be part of the budget.
Just about what I was about to say. Thank you. I do think you need to take the building issue first because it does affect the budget. So the floor is open for a motion.
Madam Chair, I'll make a motion that we approve the expenditure of additional funds to pursue the construction or the feasibility of constructing the new building. I don't know if that's putting it what we need, Kristen, or
Yes, to be included as part of the FY. Thank you.
I second.
We have a motion and a second. Opens the floor for discussion. I have one simple question. The amount of money that's being allocated for this budget, is it in any way directly correlate to the timing on the building proposal, or is it just an amount of money that happened to be available out of our budget?
It is the money that happens to be available based on the available cash above the operating reserve and the dedication of administrative penalties.
And in terms of the way, once the proposed budget is adopted, the board's ability to direct the use of the funds in the building reserve would come, what, at each individual crossroad?
Anything beyond the recommendation that's included in the budget, which is those three line items, environmental, geotechnical, and survey, that the recommendation is that those be pre-approved, if you will, the amounts that are included here, and then anything beyond that would have to come back for specific requests from the board.
And thank you. Was my understanding, but I just wanted that on the record. So I don't have any other questions. There is a motion and a second. Is there any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? The motion passes unanimously, so that allows for now consideration of the budget.
Madam Chair, I'll move that staff approve the budget as presented.
The board approved the budget?
The board approved the budget as presented.
It's contagious, Mr. Beard, the misstatement. So yes, we have a motion for the board to approve the budget as presented. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you to the board.
Takes us to agenda item number 10, the report by the Education Committee.
Good morning, Chairman Wycliffe. The Education Committee met on July 23rd. I, as the chair, and Walker Baird and Brian Payton met by teleconference, and there were a number of staff in attendance on that teleconference meeting. Mr. Olmixon and Kristen Woolman, Tony Slagle, Dion Frederick, Tony Ballou, and Gwen Jackson, and Jennifer Wheeler. We basically had 3 items to discuss in education. We discussed the appraiser trainees and sponsors and proposed amendments to Chapter 22, TAC 153.21. We discussed for approval of continuing education providers and courses, and we discussed developing a voluntary appraisal trainee review program. And the staff presented proposed outlines for continuing education, approval of continuing education providers and courses, and they provided outlines for voluntary appraisal trainee, a trainee review program. And the committee approved the outlines and structure of those items. The committee asked the staff to draft and present rules for these items at the next committee meeting, and the committee will also consider convening a writing group to develop a Texas legal update course at the next committee meeting. So that Texas update course would be specific for Texas, and it comes under our authorization to approve courses, I believe. That was given to us in the last legislative bill that passed. And so our next Education Committee meeting is tentatively scheduled for November 20th.
I'd like to add Madam Chair, I'd like to add additionally that all these changes or proposals don't require additional staff. The anticipation is that we're able to accommodate these new procedures without adding staff.
And Mr. Jeffries, am I correct in my assumption that the Texas legal update, is that the same project that Mr. De La Garza was so passionate about? Is it continuing to move forward?
I believe it is, yes.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure we still had it on a target base somewhere, because it had gotten a lot of vetting prior to that. Thank you for the report by the Education Committee. Are there questions?
Just, Madam Chair and Mr. Jeffries, I'm sorry, I think you stated November the 20th. It's October the 8th, and as I'm extending this, please extend all of my misspeaks whenever I make my reports, but just correction on that. I have a feeling that Council was going to say the same thing.
I believe I wrote it down wrong.
November 20th is our next board meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from the Education Committee? I do not believe there's any corresponding action as it relates to that committee, Council. Am I correct?
Yes, you are correct.
Perfect. Let's go to agenda item number 11, a report by the Enforcement Committee. And we will also open agenda 25 after the report by the committee.
Madam Chair, the Enforcement Committee met on July the 24th, 2015. The committee members, Laurie Fontana, myself, Mark McAnally, and Jesse Barba were in attendance, as well as staff and public members noted. The committee continued its discussion regarding qualifications for appointment as mentor. This discussion was brought up on several different agendas, and I will talk about it in detail in my agenda item number 25 coming up. We looked over several of those bullet points below in determining our proposal to the board. The committee also considered alternative standards for evaluating required experience for formal license holders and recommends a new rule regarding those reinstatements. The committee also considered and recommends proposed changes to certain board rules and new rules passed based on statutory changes adopted in the 84th legislature. We have not set a meeting for a future date. However, we plan to after this board meeting at some point. If I might, I'm going to go ahead and go over to agenda item number 25. As I stated, this particular item, after due consideration, was voted on, and that item is the mentor criteria. Give me 1 second. I've got notes in 2 different places. There was much discussion on this particular item, and as noted, the vote was in favor. Fontana and Barba and McAnally opposed for the following criteria for new mentors. Those criteria that are proposed to be added are 10-plus years as a certified residential or certified general appraiser, certified USPAP instructor, or hold a recognized appraiser designation and approved to teach courses to obtain that designation, and be in good standing with no formal discipline of the board. I'd also like to make note that we had asked for public feedback on this particular item and received a survey, and the committee did go over that survey and all of its findings. We also asked the Education Committee for their input, and I'd like to thank y'all very much for what y'all sent over to the committee. It was good information, and as you can see, considered in our proposal. I'd just like to make note that even though I did vote in favor of this, this was something that was considered for quite a while. I really wanted to be able to have it move forward. This criteria had been talked about for some time. I wanted it to move forward. I would like to say I am going to be watching to see what kind of results this has on getting some new mentors in to application to the board, and to see if it does have an attempt to, I think one of our main considerations and concerns was rural or more border presence in those cities. So hopefully, with the help of board members and some of the other maybe associations getting this word out that this criteria has been adjusted for that application, maybe we can get some more mentors in those areas to actually start putting in applications to the board for a mentorship program. And I guess that's it. If I have any questions, I'd be glad to hear them.
Madam Chair.
Yes, sir.
Ms. Fontana, I have a question, and it says designation and are approved to teach courses to obtain that designation being a USPAP instructor? What does that designation mean?
Even though the designations are not listed there, just professional designations of appraisers.
Okay, so I got you. Okay, if you're teaching appraisal institute courses, or if you're teaching farm managed rural appraisers courses to attain those designations, okay.
And I'm sure Mr. Jeffries could speak to that. It was fully vetted as far as the educational part, and that was part of their proposal to the enforcement committee.
And my other question is, that's the only really change, isn't it? Isn't it? We're just including those individuals, because currently it is USPAP instructors, yes or no? Is the only criteria?
Currently, right now, the only criteria is a USPAP instructor.
Okay.
So we've added those criteria.
We're adding those individuals that are instructors in the field to teach the individuals attempting to teach various designations or achieve various designations. The teachers of those courses to achieve various designations are now going to be able to become a mentor if this is approved by the board.
Along with 10 years certified residential or general and in good standing.
Great, thanks.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions, comments?
Madam Chair, I was wondering if Mr. McAnally would like to express why he was opposed to this motion. Yes, sir.
There's a whole host of reasons. As Ms. Fontana said, we have discussed this very extensively. And I will tell you, at the beginning, I was with the idea. But as we went through this process and we heard both board members and public members and state-certified USPAP instructors, it became very evident to me that I'm not quite sure if this is going to solve the problem of what we're trying to approach. The issue is that there's a feeling that the only way you can get a mentor is to go to a major metropolitan area. Well, I'm also thinking that even if we go and adopt these criteria, these additional criteria, we're still going to have mentors that are going into be located in major metropolitan areas. Then I also started thinking about what is our real core values about regulation. And that is that we want to not only educate, but we also want to keep the bad actors. We want to off the from abusing public trust. And so if an individual is found in violation of our standards, then it doesn't matter to me if they have to drive to Oklahoma City to get it fixed. They should be willing to get it fixed through education, mentorship, and we can also go back on the education aspect of this. And that is if they're truly educated, they would probably not get into trouble. That's one category of it. Of course, there's always the category of any profession where an individual chases the almighty dollar, and they're going to do that regardless of what standards or ethics they're held to.
Okay, I have one more question. You probably already answered this. The organizations that provide a designation, and you have a team of teachers providing education for that designation, who's identifying that? Who is saying, well, what if we came up with a Brian Patton Appraiser designation in Texas? Who is this a nationally recognized? Shouldn't we further define exactly what organizations, what designations, be more specific about who are we opening this up to exactly?
Madam Chair? I'm sorry. No.
If you don't mind, I'll answer that, and then you'll probably be able to support this answer. Remember, though, this is just application. So this board will continue to vet those applications. And I think we can catch those criteria and whether or not we believe that those designations or their ability to teach those classes meet our particular goal in appointing them as a mentor.
Okay.
So to be able to detail those out, we did not take a stab at doing that. We just opened it up, and I think Mr. Jeffries will be able to support this better, opening it up to that general criteria. And then I felt like that we could present this, propose it to the board based on the fact that we will see those applications as we have in the past and be able to look over those as the board to decide if those criteria meet our desire for them to be able to be a mentor. Did that answer your question?
Well, my concern is that we have someone that has a real estate school somewhere, El Paso or Houston or wherever, and they're teaching continuing education courses for, ACE, and they make an application to the board to become a mentor. Is that who we're anticipating could possibly become mentors?
Do they have 10 years experience?
Yes.
Are they a certified general or residential
Yes, they would have
appraiser,
all of
and are they in
those.
good
They would have all
standing?
of those things, but they'd also have a real estate school that would be providing continuing education for appraisers in the state of Texas.
And they have a designation in some, I think the answer to your question is yes.
They may or may not, and I don't, it seems to me like we ought to have a little tighter rein on that part is what I'm getting at. As who is that, what is that entity, or what are those designations, or what is that nationally recognized organization that the teachers are teaching to achieve that designation?
Madam Chair?
Yes, sir.
If I may be able, Walker, this is a professional designation, as you outlined it. If they're just a school that provides ACE, that's not for a designation. That's just to keep your certification. Right. So in that instance, in your example you're presenting, they would not qualify.
Right, and I think we ought to have that language somewhere in this process that says who that is.
I would say if the goal is to list every designation, I would be against that. That's not accomplishing at least what I understood the committee took up. The committee took up a request by the public for us to expand the opportunity for mentorship and expand the base of people that are available for mentorship. So I think it would be almost impossible to keep it updated, so I would think that would be difficult. And, I think Mr. Jeffries, who is our education chair, wanted to weigh in early on. Maybe we should give him a voice for a second. He can probably help us.
Well, I don't know if I'll be of any help or not, but the original thought is not to be exclusive but inclusive. But on the other hand, when the Education Committee discussed this, I think that our thought process was probably in line with the 8 founding members of the Appraisal Foundation. And they typically, I don't know how to say this, but they're thought of, I think, as being the ones that have the most criteria and the highest standards for the appraisal profession, and that their instructors would have been vetted, had the education required to teach the courses that they're approved for. So that was sort of the initial thought process, although, again, I certainly want to concur with Laura that this is not to be an exclusive process, but an inclusive process. But having something to start with is good, I think.
That was my understanding as well, Mr. Jeffries, that we identified those nationally recognized organizations and the instructors that had gone through that process to achieve that ability. That's what the Education Committee was talking about when we made that recommendation. We weren't just opening up
to any designation.
We want those specific designations that are recognized, exactly, through the original.
Madam Chair.
Mr. McAnally.
I understand what the conversation is going, but just so that we all understand, we tried to use that same platform for continuing education about a nationally recognized supporting member, and the ASC wrote us up on that. So I don't think we can go that direction, Walker, without being written up by the appraisal subcommittee on that, because, again, they had issues with that.
And I do appreciate and don't want to squelch the conversation. It has been this has been a topic of conversation for 2 or 3 years at a committee level. So I expect that the conversations we're having at the dais today are things that have been vetted before. Certainly, again, if there are other questions, I'd like to address them. I think the one that we're discussing now is clearly open and on the floor. The chair would either welcome a motion amending the proposal or one adopting it.
Madam Chair, I move that the board adopt the mentor criteria as recommended by the Enforcement Committee to be effective with the next cycle of mentor applications.
Thank you, Mr. Motion by Mr. Jeffries, second by Mr. Padden. Is there additional discussion?
I would like to just make a couple of other comments. Just for correction, this, Madam Chair, was not brought to the committee by public. It was brought to the committee by Mr. Walker and held in great consideration and concern by Mr. Barba, who is on the Enforcement Committee. It was not brought...
Which was brought, and again, for clarification, which was
through the public.
From public members that asked us to consider it. That's what I meant.
Yes, but I wanted the public to know that these were held concerns by board members via that. And also, just to make another note, that I think this discussion is showing a very good representation of the tie of education to enforcement. And that has been something that I have been talking about, especially in the Enforcement Committee, quite regularly, is how I am seeing on the enforcement side how much education is affecting the enforcement that the state has and this regulatory agency. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments?
Madam Chair, before you call for a vote, I just wanted to point out that the next cycle of mentor applications will not take effect until February of 2017. As the board may recall, the mentors are on alternate year renewals with the PIC members. So if the board wants to have this effective sooner, we could certainly release a call for applications and have something taken up at perhaps even the November board meeting, if that's the board's desire.
I think
And
that's
just-
the board's intent.
Okay, well, just to let the board know that also at the committee level, it was fully vetted of supply and demand. Right now, we do not have a huge need for mentors. So I just wanted the board to know that we are not in a supply-demand problem right now. So to push that forward as far as it getting on the process of the application, I understand that, all for that, but we do not have a supply and demand issue right now.
Kristen, in order to move it forward more quickly than 2017, would there need to be an alteration to the motion that's on the floor?
Correct.
Okay. Because I don't want to wait until the demand
Right.
exists to try and locate the mentor. That's my personal preference would be that we consider an amendment to the motion allowing for a call for applications now and consideration by this board. The board may very well say 0, but I hate to go to all the work that we have done and then not call for applications because those people that might be standing in the wings willing to serve might get frustrated if we don't ask them for their help for 2 years.
Madam Chair, would the motion that we might amend state that it would be effective immediately, that we would go out for additional mentor applications? If that be the case, I'd like to amend the motion that's on the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Jeffries.
Move that the board adopt the mentor criteria as recommended by the Enforcement Committee to immediately solicit additional mentor applications.
Second?
We do have an amended motion and an amended second. Any additional discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Anyone opposed?
Aye.
Record will reflect that Mr. McAnally is opposed and all other members voted for. Takes us to agenda item number 12, the report by the Executive Committee. The corresponding agenda items will be 26 and 27. And I have asked Mr. McAnally if he would be willing to give the executive report so that I don't have to do all the talking today. He has agreed to do that. So I will open the floor to Mr. McAnally.
Good morning, Madam Chair. As indicated in our notebooks, the Executive Committee met on July 23rd, 2015 by teleconference. You were in attendance, Ms. Fontana and myself. We had a staff of Commissioner Olmixon, General Counsel Kristen Warman, Tony Slagle, Counsel of Government Affairs. Basically, we had three main components that we reviewed, which this board will be reviewing here in a moment for their approval. And the first is the memorandum of understanding that we have between the Texas Appraiser Licensing Certification Board and the Texas Real Estate Commission. Most all the board here have been here long enough to understand and recognize that we share both some capital resources and human resources, and we always have this memorandum of understanding renewed each year. As things change, legislation changes, our MOU has to change along with it to be able to provide the full support to the Real Estate Commission for the functions and assistance that they give the Appraiser Licensing Certification Board. Also, we considered changes to the 2015 Real Property Appraiser Qualification Criteria that's being proposed by the Appraiser Qualifications Board. This appears to be a very significant task, and after the committee discussed the significance of this task, we are recommending that a working group be established that could work on the side as the AQB promulgates these criteria and be able to incorporate it into new rules that we will eventually have to adopt. And let's see, did I skip anything else? That was the overall review by the Executive Committee.
Thank you, Mr. McAnally. I appreciate you giving that report. You were far more efficient than I would have been today. Are there any comments, questions about the report itself? Let's move then to agenda item number 26, which is the conversation about the working group. Are there any public comments about the working group? We have put a call to action, I believe, out, asking for volunteers for that group. Seeing none, floor is open for consideration.
Madam Chair, I'd like to move that the board approve a memorandum of understanding.
It's not that. We're not on that one.
Why are we not on that?
We're on agenda item number
Sorry.
26.
I'm reading the doggone wrong one.
I guess there's really no action necessary. We have recommended a working group. We have put a call to action. I guess I'm looking for blessing. The board's comfortable with the fact that we are assembling a working group and will be reviewing applications for consideration in that working group as it relates to criminal background checks predominantly.
Madam Chair, you asking for permission to assemble a working group?
Yeah, I think we've already done it, so my apologies for confusion.
You just want a delegation for you.
So I suppose what we were looking for was clarification and notification to you all that we are assembling it, and that the executive committee's intention was to review those people who made application for consideration on the working group and vet them at our level. I wanted, I suppose, permission or at least understanding that we're intending to do that and allow you to raise any concerns you may have. Does the board want to vet the applications for the working group, or are you okay with the executive committee handling that? Or actually, I think it was the chair. In our working group, we agreed that I would actually be the individual final look at the working group.
So are you asking us to do more work or less work?
I'm asking you to do less work. I'm asking you to be informed that that was what we felt like was the most efficient method, and allow you to volunteer to take my place if you would rather be the one looking at those. Hearing none, I don't believe there's any action required. We'll move to agenda item number 27, which is the Memorandum of Understanding between the Texas Real Estate Commission and the TALCB.
Madam Chair and members, as Mr. McAnally so ably summarized, there is a standing memorandum of understanding between the Commission and the Board, and you have in your materials the proposed update. The language that is in red is proposed to be updated, and then this would be signed by the Chair of the Commission and the Chair of the Board to establish the new criteria. There's a couple of things I just wanted to point out. For the past 5 years, the board has had the opportunity, and I don't believe that it was ever considered prior to then, but during all of my tenure as your commissioner, we have assured that the board members had the opportunity to review my performance or to have input into my performance review when the commission reviewed my performance. And so we wanted to document that and make sure that that continues. Regardless of who the executive director and the commissioner may be, in the future the board would maintain under this agreement the ability to have input. A couple of the other items there in subparagraph A and C have to do with things that we talked about on the technology front when I presented the budget. So we are actually leasing, looking forward to leasing our telephone equipment as well, rather than buying it. So both the hardware and software for that, as we move to a voice over IP system. And so all of those things are detailed more so that they are, to the extent that they're used by an individual who is primarily paid by the board or solely paid by the board, that those corresponding expenses are borne by the board as well. Updating the name, instead of administrator as of January the 1st, the person in my position will be called the executive director. And then if you will look, so this is proposed for an additional 2 years, and if you'll look at Exhibit A, this is the area that has the personnel allocations for salaries for shared human resources. So currently, the board reimburses or pays the commission for 20% of my time, and that is proposed to go to 25%. And then currently, the board pays 50% of the expense for their general counsel, and this is proposed to take it to 60%, which then makes your general counsel primarily a board employee, and so then the commission will reimburse the board 40% of her expense, of the general counsel's expense. The third person that's listed there, the percentages do not change. Any questions?
Mr. Barber?
What were you called before executive director?
Administrator.
Pretty bland.
I thought so too.
Why is your allocation time on it 25%?
Maybe more so. I'll answer for him so that he can be different. Maybe more so in some cases.
And really, what I wanted to ask you was, do we need to have any kind of plan on the long-term facilities master plan sharing the costs? Because we're chipping in for that, unfortunately, but do we have to have an MOU on? I want to make sure we own our portion going forward, right? So that track,
Can't charge us rent. Yes. Well, so long as the, and so we have proceeded, and Mr. Barber, I commend you for catching that omission, but we have proceeded on a good faith basis at this point that all the expenses are borne on a pro rata, this 93 or 94, and I apologize for not knowing the exact, I'll just say it's 93.5% versus 6.5%, which is based on the comparative number of license holders. Okay, that is how we calculate that pro rata portion. So most of these expenses here are directly personnel related and able to be calculated based on a per capita. Okay, so that's the principal reason why it wasn't included here. It certainly could be included here. It is certainly the basis on which we have proceeded to date. Okay, that there will be a cost sharing, and there's a point at which when we get to a commitment, if you will, to say, okay, we're going to go forward, and so we will need from the board to chip in its $400,000 towards the $6 million or whatever those numbers turn out to be on the pro rata basis. That commitment will be then formalized, if you will, when we make that decision. But you're absolutely right. It would not be inappropriate to include in here that the long-term facilities master plan expenses are borne on a pro rata basis, and I can insert the precise criteria after recalculating.
well, I'll leave that to the executive committee to decide how to do it. I just wanted to make sure that we address it, because I don't want to be charged for it.
Unless this board decides not to make that commitment at some point, and then the alternative would be that the commission would proceed and then charge the board rent. So duly noted that Mr. Barba wants to be a co-owner and not a tenant.
And on that note, since you did make comment that you intended to potentially take it to the executive committee, I will say that while I am in support of this MOU as it is presented, I do have an issue that I intend to try and take back to the executive committee as well. and I have already engaged conversation with the TREC chair because I want to get us all on the same page. I'm not interested in vetting this issue right this minute, but I want to inform the board that it exists. I would like this board to have a presence physically in the commissioners' evaluation meeting. At the moment, you see that this agreement, and it does address the concern. It says TALCB members will have the opportunity to provide individual input, which, by the way, didn't exist until Commissioner Olmixon put it in our agreements, and so I appreciate that. In the past, we didn't even have a seat at the table, if you will. But I continue to believe as the percentage of pay from our organization increases on that side and we become more taxing, that we should at least have a single presence in the room while the TREC has 3 of their executive committee in the room to simply be sure that the individual input from this organization is elevated all the way through. Right now, there's just no opportunity for us to have that cross-check. So, again, I'm not interested in vetting that today, but I am interested in bringing it forward and intend to put it on new business as we move forward.
Madam Chair, if I may ask a question, is it standard for the terms of agreement to be 2 years by policy, or is that just 2 years were just chosen?
2 years were chosen in the past as a standard because the budgets were done on a 2-year basis. And so that simply hasn't changed. There is the ability, I apologize, let me look at the termination provision. That I mean, it can be amended at any time by mutual written agreement of the parties. So aside from a proposal to amend it, it would remain in effect for 2 years.
Okay. Other questions or comments? Hearing none, I'd entertain a motion.
Now may I make a motion?
Now you may make this motion.
Madam Chair, I'd like to move that the board approve the memorandum of understanding with the Texas Real Estate Commission as presented.
Second.
We have a motion by Ms. Fontana, a second by Mr. McAnally. Any additional discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously. Let's take up agenda item number, 23 was considered in the update on the building plans already, correct? It is 11:30, and so the timing is getting close to consideration of the executive session time frame. We really don't have anything else we could take up that would be relatively short, do we, Kristen?
You could take up agenda item 7.
Agenda item number 7. I'm sorry, Mr. Robert, did you say you're worried about how long it would take?
No, ma'am, Ms. Mosley.
No worries. Let's go ahead and take up agenda item number 7. That is discussion and possible action to approve the request for modification of an agreed order in the matter of complaint number 13-299.
Madam Chair and board members, Kristen Warman, General Counsel. This agenda item is before you at the request of Ben Autry Campbell, the respondent in complaint number 13299. Mr. Campbell has had difficulty due to health reasons to complete the terms and conditions of the agreed order that was signed and approved by the board at its meeting on November 21st, 2014, and Mr. Campbell is requesting an extension of time to November 1st of 2015. You should have received some handouts at the dais this morning, in addition to those that are already included in the materials that are in your books. Mr. Campbell has completed all but one of the required education courses under his agreed order, and that was the residential report writing course, I believe. And he is scheduled to attend that class later in September. And it's my understanding, and the enforcement director could perhaps speak to this, that staff is not opposed to Mr. Campbell's request for an extension.
Yes, staff is not opposed, and I think it's actually the cost approach course that he's scheduled to take in September. He's completed the report writing course.
Thank you for that correction.
So that's the class that's with a proposed date of September 1st and 2nd? Is that what this email indicates?
Correct.
And are all the other items met, the mentorship and?
Yes, he completed his mentorship back in January, and that certificate is included at page 94 of your materials in the book. The handout for the USPAP course and the residential report writing course should have been on the dais when you took your seats this morning.
If we were to give him an extension, is there a recommendation of time?
He is requesting until November 1st, 2015.
That's why I'm asking. In consideration of the only class he needs is apparently available September the 1st and 2nd, correct?
There is the class that he is scheduled to take on that date, and he has requested an additional month, if you will, in the event that he has additional health concerns.
Gotcha.
In the materials, you may note at page 85, Mr. Campbell details some of the health concerns that he has experienced to date.
So the consideration of action for this board is, do we want to allow him an extension to November?
Madam Chair, I recommend that we do allow him the extension till November 2015. All right, should I make a motion?
I'd love a motion.
You'd
so
like
we
a
can
motion?
move.
I will make, I move that the board allow the extension of Mr. Campbell's completion of his requirements to November, is it 1st? 1st of 2015.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Beard, second by, I'm sorry, I didn't see, Mr. McNally. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes unanimously. I believe the most efficient thing to do now is go to executive session. Do you have any other recommendations, General Counsel?
No, Madam Chair.
Okay. So the time is now 11:35. The board will go into executive session to obtain advice from legal counsel or discuss pending or contemplated litigation, including settlement offers and enforcement action pursuant to Texas Government Code 551.071. We anticipate returning to open session in approximately 45 minutes, or 45 days, depending. I'm teasing. Time is now 12:21, and we are reassembled from executive session. We will take up our agenda, starting now at agenda item number 5 and 6, which are the consent agenda items. Number 5 is the ratification. 5 and 6. Our consent agenda, ratification of the official record from the May the 15th board meeting, and the approval of final orders on complaints identified as A through I on agenda item number 6. So the floor is open for a consent approval, or if you'd prefer to discuss any of these items individually, they need to be removed from the consent agenda.
Madam Chair, I move that the board ratify and approve all items on the consent agenda as represented.
Second that.
We have a motion by Ms. Fontana, a second by Mr. Jeffries. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Do you have your staff ready to do 13?
Some.
So let's go to agenda item number 14, discussion and possible action to adopt amendments to 22 TAC 153.1.
Madam Chair and board members, Kristen Warman, General Counsel. Agenda item 14 is the discussion to adopt amendments to 22 TAC 153.1 definitions. This rule was proposed at the May board meeting and is up for you today in consideration of adoption. The proposed changes, as published in the June 5th, 2015 issue of the Texas Register, add a definition of the term real estate appraisal experience. We did not receive any comments on the amendments as proposed, and staff recommends adopting the rule as proposed.
Madam Chair, I make a motion to approve item number 14 to add real estate appraisal experience to the list of definitions in our regulations.
Thank you. We have a motion. Is there a second? Motion by Mr. Barba, second by Mr. Beard. All those, any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Takes us to agenda item number 15, discussion and possible action to adopt amendments to 22 TAC 155.2, work relating to property tax disputes.
Madam Chair and board members, this amendment is before you today for consideration of adoption. The proposed amendments were published in the Texas Register on June 5th, 2015. No comments were received on the amendments as proposed. The amendments correct a typographical error to reflect the proper statutory reference, a change from tax code to occupations code.
Madam Chair, I make a motion to approve item number 15 to correct the typographical error in our regulations.
Second.
A motion by Mr. Barba, second by Ms. Fontana. Any discussion?
A long time ago, we're just doing this now. That's what I thought, wow, I thought we'd seen this last year sometime, but it was just correcting the technical.
Any other questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes unanimously. It carries us to agenda item number 16, discussion and possible action to adopt amendments to 22 TAC 159.204, complaint processing.
Madam Chair and board members, this amendment is before you today to consider adoption of the amendment. The amendment implements a penalty matrix for complaints filed against an appraisal management company. This was recommended by the AMC Advisory Committee, and we did not receive any comments on the amendments as proposed. Staff also recommends adopting the rules as published.
Madam Chair? May I make a motion?
Yes, sir.
I move that the staff is authorized on behalf of the board to submit for adoption amendments to 22 TAC 159.204, complaint processing without changes to Texas published in the Texas Register, along with any technical or non-substantive change required for adoption.
Motion by Mr. Jeffries, second by Mr. Beard. Any discussion?
I do, Madam Chair. I'd like to thank staff again publicly at the board level for the work that you performed on this particular item. I appreciate it.
Any additional comment? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Let's go. Okay. That's, since we're on rules, I'm going to just keep rolling for a minute. Agenda item number 17, discussion and possible action to adopt emergency amendments to 22 TAC Chapter 153, rules relating to the provisions of the Texas Appraiser Licensing and Certification Act.
Madam Chair and board members, this rule is before you for adoption on an emergency basis today to be effective September 1st, 2015. These are changes that are mandated to implement changes adopted by the legislature to Chapter 55 of the Texas Occupations Code this past legislative session. You will note that these amendments relate to military applicants and include military service members, veterans, or their spouses. amendment also includes changes to the supplemental form for those individuals who would qualify under the rule as amended. Staff recommends that we adopt the amendments and the related form revisions on an emergency basis as presented with an effective date of September 1, 2015. You will also note that these same amendments are being proposed and will go through the normal rulemaking process under a later agenda item.
Madam Chair, I'd like to move that staff is authorized on behalf of the board to submit the amendments to 22 TAC 153.9 applications without changes to text except for any technical and non-substantive changes required for adoption, and to adopt related form revisions with an effective date of September the 1st, 2015.
We have a motion from Ms. Fontana, a second by Mr. Beard for agenda item number 17A. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? So if I could get a similar motion for 17B, if that's the intent.
So moved.
We have a motion by Ms. Fontana and a second by Mr. Beard for agenda item number 17B, which is a different amendment number 22 TAC 153.17. Any discussion?
Madam Chair and board members, these amendments simply relate to the renewal or extension of a license and apply the same changes adopted by the legislature for military members, veterans, and spouses that we just discussed on the application stage.
Any additional comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Agenda item number 18 is discussion and possible action to adopt emergency amendments to 22 TAC 157.18, motions for rehearing.
Madam Chair and board members, this rule is before you today to consider adoption of emergency amendments based on changes adopted by the legislature to Chapter 2001 Texas Government Code, which we commonly refer to as the Administrative Procedure Act or the APA, and those changes are effective September 1, 2015. The amendments align the rule with these statutory changes, and the Executive Committee has considered and recommends adoption of these emergency amendments.
Changes to text except for any technical or non-substantive changes required for adoption with an effective date of September 1, 2015.
Second.
A motion by Mr. Beard, a second by Mr. Padden. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? That motion passes unanimously. We'll take you back to agenda item number 13, staff reports. Thank you for the hard work, board, working through those rules.
Madam Chair and members, I have a comprehensive report that alerts you to all the things that you've already done. And so I am not going to provide you with that report. There are a couple of items in here that I do want to express publicly on the record. As you're well aware, SB 1007 was signed by the governor, accomplishes many of the policy objectives sought by this board through its strategic planning process last year. The bill will become law effective January 1 of 2016. Congratulations are due to the appraisal consumers of Texas and the professionals who make their living providing appraisal services. And our gratitude goes out to those who work so hard to ensure the bill's passage, especially the Foundation Appraiser Coalition of Texas, who is represented, as they are always reliably here in attendance at our meeting today. In October, the Association of Appraiser Regulatory Officials will meet in D.C. and we will be in attendance to ensure Texas voice is heard when federal policies are being shaped and interpreted. Note that the appraisal subcommittee will be with us in February to report the results of their biennial audit visit, and your staff will be fully prepared for their review. Everything else you've already accomplished or are about to. So unless you have any questions for me, the directors will now provide their regular progress reports. No questions? Thank you.
No questions, just a continued echoing of the appreciation of FACT and the work that they did during the legislative session. This board appreciates your work.
Good afternoon, Lori DeAnda, Director of Reception and Communication Services. Before I refer you to the C1 report, I have two new team members that I would like to introduce. First, we have Mandy Warshell. Mandy is originally from San Antonio and moved to Austin in 2006. She attended school at Austin Community College and Texas State University and earned her degree in public administration. She worked as an intern for the City of Lakeway, conducting research on several local issues. After her internship, she was employed as a lead teller in the bank industry, and in 2015, she obtained her real estate sales agent's license and has 10 years of customer service experience. Mandy is engaged to her fiance and is a mother of a 13-year-old son. Thank you.
Welcome.
Next, we have Jessie Gallo. Jessie came from Austin Energy, where she worked as a bilingual customer service representative in the commercial department. She has been in the customer service industry for 10 years and is excited to be a team member of RCS. Her goal is to grow within the agency and become a successful team member. Other than work, her attention is on her family, 3 puppies, and her friends, and she loves being outdoors and always finds a way to go water tubing. Thank you. Okay, we currently have a vacancy that we're working on filling, so if any of you know anyone that's interested in applying, please have them do so. I'd appreciate it. Now please refer to the C1 report. For the month of June, we received a total of 25,575 calls. We handled 255 walk-ins and responded to over 7,300 emails within a 2-business time frame. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Gwen Jackson, Director of Education and Licensing Services. If you will refer to the first report, which is the number of active certifications and licenses, you will see that we have a total of 6,054 active certifications and licenses as of June. This is 47 more than we had in June of last year. We have a total of temporary out-of-state appraisers of 918, and we have 139 inactive appraisers. If there are no questions, we'll move to the next report, which is a report on the AMC registrations as of June. We have registered a total of 218 AMCs since inception in 2012. Within that time period, we've had 12 that have surrendered their licenses, 3 have been revoked, and 24 registrations expired, which brings us to a total of 179 AMC registrations. During this period, we've also renewed 149. If there are no questions, the next report is the L1 report, and this report reflects the number of applications that we've received and processed, as well as the number of licenses issued from those applications. You'll note that we have a slight decrease in original apps received and licenses issued from those applications. However, we see a 17% increase in renewals that have issued. If there are no questions, we'll move to our examination activity. The examination activity gives you year-to-date results from September through June. of this year. And then the bottom part of that report provides you with the monthly result, which is just for the month of June itself. If we move to the next report, here is where I've given you a fiscal year-to-date comparison of June, between June of this year and June of last year. And you will see that we had an overall appraiser pass rate of 55.3% this year, and it was 60.5% from June of last year. If there are no questions, that concludes my report.
I don't know that I really have a question, Madam Chair, but maybe an observation. In the appraiser trainee reinstatements, we have quite a decrease. And just for a point of discussion, this is where the future of the appraisal industry is coming from, Board. So I think that should be just on your radar, noted that we have a decrease in reinstatements, a little bit of a decrease in original applications, 12%, and the fact that our industry, again, is still aging quite rapidly. And just another note, I don't know how many appraisers on the board or in the room or on appraisal report, but they put out a poll every once in a while. And a poll that they just put out had asked the question, how many of the appraisers that were on this particular website would entertain taking on a trainee. 78% said no, they would not entertain it. Just want us to know that as a board, that that's the future of our industry. So I think we need to look at these numbers and watch them. Thank you.
Madam Chair and board members, just a quick clarifying question. I believe reinstatements are actually late renewals. So my understanding is that this just reflects a decrease in the number of late renewals. So it's perhaps caused by the fact that trainees are renewing more timely.
Yeah, I think I was bringing that, but the 12% and the decrease of original also. But thank you.
Thank you.
Is budget next? No? Steve?
Good afternoon. Steve Spiropoulos, Director of ITS, Information and Technology Services. Before I talk about the report, I'd like to mention that we hired a new employee since the last meeting. His name is John Vardanian. He's right there. John comes to us from the great state of California. He has started writing code. He's a programmer, by the way, just in case you didn't know. Started writing code in grade 4 and has a great passion for computers and code writing. Worked for several companies here in Austin and as well in California, and we're glad to have him on the team.
Welcome.
Secondly, I'd like to announce that we upgraded our email system. That was one of our major projects since the last meeting as well. The new email system has improved performance and reliability, which in turn makes us more efficient and helps us serve our customer base better. Okay. We are also hiring 3 new positions. One is a quality assurance analyst. That'll help us with our code testing to make sure that whatever we do actually deliver is free of issues and has been tested thoroughly. This position is currently being interviewed for, so we should have an offer letter at some point next week for one of the candidates. The second position that we are going to be posting is a system administrator position. So looking after the network, looking after our servers, the person that was in that position has resigned, so we need to fill that as well. And then the third position we're posting is another programmer position due to another resignation that came in last week. So we will be filling that position in as well, and that's going to help us continue moving forward with our projects. Any questions on that? Okay, I will direct your attention to the I-1 report. So we had significant increases in total pages viewed and total unique monthly visitors. Part of the increase from roughly 1 million to 3 million was the fact that we upgraded our website, but also the fact that we are capturing internal visits to the pages from our staff. So the RCS team have access to the TALCB website, and they use that website to access certain tools that allow them to help the customers when they're on the phone. So what we're going to do is we're going to adjust our statistics to remove that pool of visits, if you will, from our internal users and only report the visits from the external users so that we're comparing apples to apples. So that'll be on the next report. We had increases in online percentage of utilization for applications as well as renewals, and we had increases also for the total monthly unique visitors. That doesn't count the RCS staff. So as you can see, a lot of people were curious about our new website, and so that those numbers are reflected there. Are there any questions?
I don't know that I have a question, but I have a problem and I need your help.
Sure.
I think you're the guy that can fix it.
Okay.
So I use our website to communicate with my fellow board members.
Yep.
And when we redid the website, for the life of me, I can't find the board. So if I can't find us, I suspect the public that might be interested or the appraiser out in the world that might be interested in communicating with us can't find us either.
Okay.
And I don't care how we fix it. Maybe it just is a tutorial for me. But I'd like us to consider that. I've mentioned it a couple of times.
Right.
But if we can somehow get that on someone's radar screen where there's a tab somewhere that lets people get to the board so that I can find them when I'm trying to call them.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
We will look into that.
And Madam Chair, I admit my laziness for not checking up to see if those things that I had asked for, I think is at committee level maybe, to make sure that everybody's contact info was correct.
Yes, it was corrected.
Thank you.
Thanks for the report.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Melissa Huert, the Director of Staff and Support Services. I'm not her, but I'm here in her place today. She's actually at training. So I'll just direct your attention to the end of June budget status report and summarize it by saying we have spent 14% less in expenses or incurred expenses, 14% less than projected, and our revenue is up 10% above projected.
Good job.
Any questions?
We like it that way.
Okay. The next report you will see is the S1A in there, and this is when the board allocates money to reserves other than the operational reserve, we actually invest it. And so this is just the investment report. So it shows $260,000 worth of investments, and you can see the fairly low return on Treasury notes and the maturity dates for those. We did have one, the smallest one, the $60,000 one, was actually in cash. The date that this report at the end of June, it matured in June, and it has since been reinvested in July. So you'll see this on a go-forward basis. Any questions? All right, thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and board members. I'm Troy Bollier, Director of the Standards and Enforcement Services Division, and wanted to point your attention to the first enforcement report that you have in front of you there that reflects both number of cases received and closed. And as you can see, that as of the end of July 24th, we have 188 open cases, received a total of 307 through almost the end of 2015. We still got a few more weeks, and have closed 299. Noteworthy here, I'd point out experience audits. The number received was over the past year slightly higher during the first half of the fiscal year, and that was probably due to the changing AQB criteria. We saw a bit of a bump in those numbers, and you can see the latter part of the year they've come back down. I'd point you to the second report as well regarding AMCs, and again you can see here not really much change in terms of complaints on the AMC side of our program. We had a total almost through the end of the year of 6 coming in, including 1 in June, and it looks like through almost the end of the year here we've closed 6, so not a lot of AMC complaint activity. You can see there at the bottom we currently have 3 that are open. The next slide.
Madam Chair, if you don't mind, Troy, but just before we go off of that, we had 10 RFAs or covert. Which is that in May? Because this wasn't on our May report, evidently. I mean, obviously, our last board meeting.
Yes, ma'am. I did review all these reports and make some updates, and in doing that, correcting some of the figures, we did receive a couple of requests for assistance. There was a rather complicated couple of cases involving a couple of different law enforcement agencies, so that was kind of a bit of an unusual spike.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. The total complaints, open complaint slide is a little bit different than you've probably seen in the past. This is a combination that I did, so it still gives you information about open complaints based on fiscal year, but then it also combines, as you can see, the row along the bottom, total one-year-old cases, so you can get that, an idea of that as well. And as you can see, total one-year-old cases is down significantly, 48%. And we've made every effort. I think this reflects the efforts that we've had in reducing the backlog. And you can see that basically there are very few stragglers. Basically, we're working a handful of 2014 and mostly 2015 cases. Those old ones in particular, for example, 2009 is a request for assistance that's actively pending with a law enforcement matter. And then the same for the 2013 is actually a PIC case that was a rather complicated, involved case. So basically, the staff has really reduced the backlog, and we're really just focusing in on the last 2 fiscal years. The only one that's really increasing, of course, is 2015, because we're still obviously receiving complaints. So unless you have any questions there, I'll point you to the case resolution slide here. And you can see case resolutions for fiscal year 2015. A total of 130 complaints resolved. And one thing I would point out on this slide here, the nomenclature underneath the pie chart there that says percentage of respondents, that should read percentage of license holders, and we'll correct that going forward. But basically, you can see here we have a total of 130 complaints resolved. Roughly 70% of those are some form of a dismissal. And you can see the breakout there on the dismissals. Almost half of the complaints resolved are straight dismissals with no warning letter or anything like that. Then we basically have just about 30% are some form of discipline. Almost all of that is agreed discipline. So as the Commissioner mentioned earlier, the number of litigated cases that go through the SOA hearing process is way down. And then, as I mentioned, the box underneath the chart there with the percentage of license holders with disciplinary action. That's reflecting, you can see the last 3 fiscal years based on the total number of licensees, which is at the top of the chart there, 7,263. Basically, you can see the current fiscal year, it's about a 0.5%, and then you can see the figures for 2014 and 13. And then the last item I'd point out on the bottom right-hand corner there is the recidivism rate. It's about 12.82%, and obviously that reflects people who have been disciplined more than once. They're back again with another disciplinary issue.
Troy, before you move forward, I have a question on total open complaints, but I didn't want to interrupt you when you got to this slide, so can you go back one? Can you just describe for me, when it says in review, and then the next column is investigation complete, these are the focus, I suppose, of our upcoming audit, so I'm just curious, what does it mean when it says in review?
In review means that it has gone through the initial opening process and it has been assigned to an investigator who is reviewing that complaint at some level. Once they have completed their report, if you will, and delivered it to me and an attorney, then it would be moving into the negotiation, the resolution phase.
Okay. So investigation complete is, I suppose, something in between those two as well, somewhere close to?
Investigation complete means just that. The investigation is complete, the report's been written, and it'll either be with myself being processed for a dismissal or with an attorney for some type of potential discipline.
Okay, thank you.
The next slide here, you can see the number of complaints that we've received per license type. And you can see the general trend has been, over the last several years, a decrease in the complaint volume that we're getting. And what we have here, we have 2015 figures, obviously, the current year, and then the 5 prior fiscal years.
Troy, so it looks like there's an uptick in appraiser training complaints and the certified general complaints since last year.
Yes, so the appraiser trainee from 2014 went from 2 to 6, and then you said the certified general. A little bit of an uptick there, that's correct.
And these complaints received also are inclusive of staff-initiated complaints?
This is all complaints received, yes, ma'am. And then to segue into Ms. Fontana's inquiry, we do have this slide here regarding staff-initiated complaints based on experience audits, which has been a recent inquiry by several members. And you can see here figures going back to 2009. The total over that period is 40, and basically half of them are supervisory appraisers, if you will. And you can see here in fiscal year 2015 that basically that's the only group that's really had any staff-initiated complaints. And I would just point out, you know, generally that's going to been my experience that the one scenario where I would see potentially staff initiating a complaint on a trainee or someone other than a supervisor would be in an ethics type situation or an extreme gross negligence. You wouldn't typically see situations involving trainees because of that knowledge disparity between a trainee who's trying to learn and an experienced appraiser.
Madam Chair, if you don't mind, I have a question or two for you, Troy. Back when I was just looking at our agreed orders for this particular quarter, out of them, 2 of the 3, 415, if I'm reading this correctly, here today have agreed orders.
Yes, ma'am.
That were with us today, and then 6 out of 9 of 2014 are here with us today. So just as a general question, how often are the staff-initiated complaints moved into agreed orders? Because we're not seeing all, are we seeing the full count number here?
I'm not sure your question.
In essence, it doesn't look like we have the same percentage of dismissal rate. What would be my assumption is that if it's staff initiated, y'all are already seeing something that's perking, your eye pretty good.
Right.
So I would assume that it'd have a higher likelihood, instead of it being initiated by the outside,
Right.
of moving on to
That's
something
correct.
more. Okay, that's what I was trying to get to.
Yep. Any other questions? All right, thank you.
Yes, that concludes staff reports, or?
It does.
I believe we are to agenda item number 19, rules for possible proposal. Agenda item number 19 is discussion and possible action to propose amendments to 22 TAC, Chapter 153, rules relating to provisions of the Texas Appraiser Licensing and Certification Act. They're described as items A through G, and I'm sure we'll get to hear about the descriptions of each.
Madam Chair and board members, Kristen Warman, General Counsel. The first item for consideration is Agenda Item 19A, proposed amendments to 22-153.1 definitions. These proposed amendments clarify the definition of appraiser trainee and add definitions of the terms certified general appraiser, certified residential appraiser, licensed residential appraiser, supervisory appraiser, and trade association to align this rule with statutory changes to Chapter 1103 of the Texas Occupations Code that were adopted by the 84th Legislature. The Executive Committee has considered and recommends proposing these amendments, and staff also concurs that the amendments should be proposed as presented.
Staff is authorized on behalf of this board to submit amendments to 22 TAC 153.1 definitions as presented for publication and public comment to the Texas Register, along with any technical or non-substantive changes required for proposal.
Second it.
We have a motion by Mr. Beard, a second by Mr. Jeffries. Any discussion?
Madam Chair, if I may, I know this is all technical, but we are talking about definitions, so you'll just bear with me. I had to look this up because as you know, I'm not an appraiser, I'm a public member, so I don't know a lot of the insider jargon. So I looked up certified residential appraiser, and I think what the feds use is a slightly different definition, and I wanted to ask you if you would consider it. It says a certified appraiser who is authorized to appraise 1 to 4, instead of 1-4, 1, 2, TO 4, residential units without regard to value or complexity. And I was just wondering, maybe we should track the exact same language that the feds use when we use our definition.
This is the definition that came directly from the AQB criteria that was published and given to staff and the board members by the ASC.
Is it possible that the definition Mr. Barba is looking at is the historic definition, and what we are considering is a proposed future definition?
No, this is the definition as it appears in the 2015 criteria.
I looked up the website. I went to the AQB website, and this is what they had on it.
This is actually in the published version that they handed out to us. It was just revised recently because it deleted the 2008 criteria. I mean, I'm happy to check and double check and consider that if the board wants to take a recess.
I saw the same thing on number 32, the licensed residential appraiser. Again, the 1-4 residential units, these 124, TO 124, and then at the end of the definition, there's an additional part to the definition which is not here, which says is a licensed residential appraiser, but not the appraisal of subdivisions. This person cannot appraise subdivisions.
There is no reference to subdivisions in the published version of the AQP definition of this appraiser category.
So a licensed residential appraiser can, sorry. So does the licensed residential appraiser, are they allowed to do anything above $1 million?
No.
No, right.
That's the
Are they
transaction value.
Okay, so they're limit, so there's a scope, right? There's only, they can only do so much.
Correct.
Are they allowed to appraise subdivisions?
If the subdivision is a 1 to 4 residential unit, I'm not aware of any subdivisions that are that small.
They're not. They're not allowed to appraise a subdivision.
Well, that would be the only thing is I would ask it, because again, I looked up the definition to see what it was, and maybe you could reconfirm what it is. We can track the same language.
That's what we believe we've done, correct? We believe we've tracked the language. It's just
We have somebody getting the book, so we'll make sure that we have the correct definition, and we'll make any changes. Perhaps we could move on to the next item.
Can we table this?
Yes, let's. So we have a motion and a second. Can we just move from it, leaving it open, or should we just table it for the moment?
We can table it for the moment.
So let's table agenda item number 19A, which is 153.1 definitions. We will take it back up when we get the information in the room. Let's go to 153.5 fees, which is agenda item number 19B.
Madam Chair and board members, the proposed amendments to this rule align the rule with statutory changes adopted by the 84th legislature, and they also add a provision for the board to collect fees for providing certified copies. The executive committee has considered and recommends proposing these amendments.
Madam Chair, I'd like to move that staff is authorized on behalf of this board to submit amendments to 22 TAC 153.5 fees as presented for publication and public comment to the Texas Register, along with any technical or non-substantive changes required for proposal.
Motion by Ms. Fontana and a second by Mr. Beard. All those, any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion passes unanimously. Go to agenda item number 19C, 153.9, applications.
Madam Chair and board members, the proposed amendments to this rule would align the rule with statutory changes to Chapters 55 and 1103 of the Texas Occupations Code adopted by the 84th legislature. You will note that these are the same amendments that were proposed and adopted on an emergency basis earlier this meeting, applicable to military service members, veterans, and the spouse of a service member in the armed forces. In addition, one of the proposed amendments that was not included in those emergency amendments is the 2-year statute of limitations that was adopted as a statutory change in Senate Bill 1007. Staff recommends proposing the amendments as presented.
Madam Chair, I'd like to move that staff authorize on behalf of this board to submit amendments to 22 TAC 153.9 applications as presented for publication and public comment to the Texas Register, along with any technical or non-substantive changes required for proposal.
I'll second that.
We have a motion by Ms. Fontana and a second by Mr. Jeffries, and maybe a request by the chair that we get some coffee. You guys are slowing down on me. Is there any additional comment? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Motion passes unanimously. We'll go to 153.16, license reinstatement. Which appears as agenda item number D. Sorry.
Madam Chair and board members, this rule is before you. It's a new rule that would allow persons who previously held a license issued by the board to reinstate an expired license as authorized by the Appraiser Qualifications Board. The Enforcement Committee has considered and recommends proposing this rule.
Madam Chair, I move that staff is authorized on behalf of this board to submit new rule 22 TAC 153.16, license reinstatement is presented for publication and public comment to the Texas Register, along with any technical or non-substantive changes required for proposal.
Second.
Motion by Mr. McAnally, second by Ms. Fontana. Any conversation? All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Motion passes unanimously. We'll go to 153.17, renewal and extension of license, which is agenda item number 19E.
Madam Chair and board members, the proposed amendments to this rule would align the rule with statutory changes to Chapters 55 and 1103 of the Texas Occupations Code adopted by the 84th Legislature. Again, the board adopted these amendments on an emergency basis earlier this meeting. There are a couple of minor terminology changes at page 184 of 271 that were not adopted on an emergency basis. And staff recommends proposing the amendments as presented.
Madam Chair, I move that the staff is authorized on behalf of the board to submit amendments to 22 TAC 153.17, renewal or extension of license, as presented for publication and public comment to the Texas Register, along with any technical or non-substantive changes required for proposal.
Motion by Mr. Jeffries, second by Mr. Padden. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Agenda item number 19F, 153.20, guidelines for revocation, suspension, denial of license.
Madam Chair and board members, the amendments before you today propose changes regarding compliance with an agreed order of the board and the statute of limitations for investigating a complaint to align this rule with statutory changes to Chapter 1103 of the Texas Occupations Code that were adopted by the 84th Legislature. The Enforcement Committee has considered these proposed changes and recommends proposing the amendments.
Madam Chair, I move that staff is authorized on behalf of this board to submit amendments to 22 TAC 153.20, guidelines for revocation, suspension, denial of licensure, probationary license, as presented for publication and public comment to the Texas Register, along with any technical or non-substantive changes required for proposal.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Beard, second by Ms. Fontana. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Carries us to 153.21. Agenda item number 19G, appraiser trainees and sponsors.
Madam Chair and board members, the amendments to this rule propose changes to align the rule with statutory changes to Chapter 1103 of the Texas Occupations Code as adopted by the 84th Legislature. The Education Committee has considered the proposed changes and recommends proposal of the amendments.
Madam Chair, I'd like to move that staff is authorized on behalf of the board to submit amendments to 22 TAC 153.21, appraiser trainees and sponsors as presented for publication and public comment to the Texas Register, along with any technical or non-substantive changes required for proposal.
Second.
Motion by Ms. Fontana, second by Mr. Jeffries. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Are we in a position to take back up 153.1?
Yes, we are. If we could just take about a 5-minute break.
Okay. Then we will, the time is now 10 minutes after 1 o'clock, and we will take a 5-minute break, returning to the dais at 1:15.
Of minor textual changes to subsection 14, certified residential appraiser, that appears in your materials at page 64 of 271, and that would be, the new text would read, certified residential appraiser, a certified appraiser who is authorized to appraise 1-2-4 unit residential properties without regard to value or complexity, period. The other textual change would be required to subsection 32, and that would be to change the references of 1-4 to 1-2-4. And there are two references in subsection 32 that would need to be changed. So staff recommends publishing or proposing the amendments as presented with those corrections.
So, everybody caught up? There was a motion, we tabled, so the motion and the...
I just amend the motion accordingly.
Actually, I think I made the motion.
I think that's correct. So, Mr. Jeffries, do you accept the amendments to the motion?
I move that we accept this as amended, yes.
And Mr. Beard? Okay. And any additional discussion? I will just comment, thank you, Jesse, for taking the time to actually look it up. All those in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? We're going to go to agenda item number 20. At the board request, I'm going to open up 20, A, B, C, D, and E, all at one time. Agenda item number 20 is generally a discussion and possible action to propose amendments to 22 TAC, Chapter 157, Rules Relating to Practice and Procedure.
Madam Chair and board members, the first rule before you today for proposed amendments is rule number 22 TAC 157.7, denial of a license, as well as 157.8, adverse action against a license holder or registrant. These two particular provisions are being reorganized for clarity and to allow a better understanding for the readers. Basically, we are moving adverse action against a license holder from 157.8 to 157.7 so that 157.7 will have all adverse action contemplated by the board, including denial of a license as well as adverse action against a license holder. That would leave only order modifications in Rule 157.8, and staff recommends proposing the amendments as presented. The Executive Committee has also considered these proposed amendments and recommends those amendments to the board. In item 20B, the two rules in subchapter B of Chapter 157, Rules 157.9, Notice of Hearing, and 157.12, Failure to Attend Hearing, Default Judgment. These proposed amendments are before you to align these sections with statutory changes adopted by the 84th Legislature. The Executive Committee has also considered these proposed amendments and recommends them to the board. You will note at page 225 of your materials in 157.9, we are amending that rule to require compliance with Chapter 2001 of the Texas Government Code for the notice of hearing. In addition, at page 226, we are amending or proposing amendments to 157.12 that would also align the rule with statutory changes to Chapter 2001 of the Government Code. The one correction in this rule is that we will no longer need the reference to cost recovery in the caption of that rule, so that should be taken out. and the caption would just be failure to attend hearing, semicolon, default.
Thought we were going to do all of them.
Moving on to item 20C. The three amendments in this item are to Rules 157.17, Final Decisions and Orders, 157.18, Motions for Rehearing, semicolon, Finality of Decisions, and 157.20, Judicial Review. These amendments also would align these sections with statutory changes to Chapter 1103 of the Texas Occupations Code and Chapter 2001 of the Texas Government Code adopted by the 84th Legislature. The amendments also clarify the action to be taken by the board when a motion for rehearing does not include specific grounds for rehearing. The Executive Committee considered and recommends proposing these amendments as well. The next item in item 20 is 20D, proposed amendments to Rules 157.25, temporary suspension, and proposed amendments to 157.26, unlicensed activity. The amendments are being proposed to Rule 157.25 to align that rule with statutory changes adopted by the 84th Legislature to Chapter 2001 Texas Government Code and Chapter 1103 Texas Occupations Code. The Executive Committee considered and recommends proposing the amendments to 22 TAC 157.25. The Enforcement Committee considered and recommends proposing the new Rule 157.26, unlicensed activity, to implement changes to Chapter 1103 Texas Occupations Code adopted by the 84th Legislature. The last item in this agenda item, item 20E, is to propose amendments to Rule 157.31, Investigative Conference. These amendments would also align this provision with statutory changes to Chapter 1103 of the Texas Occupations Code adopted by the 84th Legislature. The Enforcement Committee considered and recommends proposal of these amendments.
Madam Chair, due to these amendments to 157, the proposed amendments to 157 being recommended for proposal from several different committees of this board, I would like to move that staff has authorized on behalf of the board to submit amendments to 152 TAC 157.7.8.9.12.17.18.20.25.26 and .31 as presented for publication for public comment to the Texas Register, along with any technical or non-substantive changes required for proposal.
A motion by Ms. Fontana, a second by Mr. Padden. Any discussion?
Madam Chair.
Mr. Barba?
Just very quickly, I noticed that the new rules, you kept tracking a term, a factual and legal basis for the order or for making a decision, either if it's the commissioner or the board. And now I know you're a very good attorney, you're a board-certified administrative lawyer, and you write thousands of words worth of rules, so I'm not questioning your competency, but why is that term in there? Can you just tell me?
Yes, that term is in there due to the infinite wisdom of the 84th Legislature, because that term was adopted in statutory changes to Chapter 2001 of the Texas Government Code, the Administrative Procedure Act. Apparently, perhaps some other agencies were not including those factual and legal basis in their orders, and the legislature...
I noticed that we had that, I mean, it's part of the orders.
Correct. Correct.
Now, there's a rule on us that we have to do it, so I was just wondering what your justification for that, that's fine. And I know there was a statutory change, but I didn't relies on very specific statutory.
And that's the specific statutory language that the legislature required. So we wanted to make sure that our license holders knew that we were following what the legislature has directed.
Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? So 20A through E passes unanimously. Takes us to 21, discussion and possible action to repeal 22 TAC 157.19, prerequisite to judicial review.
Madam Chair and board members, the proposed repeal is before you and results from statutory changes to Chapter 1103 Texas Occupations Code and Chapter 2001 Texas Government Code as adopted by the 84th Legislature. This language is actually being moved to Section 157.18, motions for rehearing, as just approved in it by the board in this meeting. The Executive Committee has considered and recommends the repeal of this rule.
Madam Chair, I move that staff is authorized on behalf of the board to submit for repeal 22 TAC 157.19, prerequisite to judicial review as presented for publication and public comment to the Texas Register.
Second.
A motion by Ms. Fontana, second by Mr. Barba. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes unanimously. I believe we'll be going to agenda item number 28, request for potential future meeting agenda items.
Madam Chair, I would like to make a request for a future agenda item. I just, in my review of the materials for this board meeting, I was going over our agreed orders, and I just made a observation that the orders, in my opinion, did not have a consistent interpretation of USPAP. It just seemed like every time I would read an order, the interpretation of one standard read in an order one way, yet in another case it read a different way. So I'd like to know, I'd like to propose for future business, maybe at the executive committee level, for us to have discussion and possible action of the possibility of maybe even the non-appraiser members that sit on the board to take the minimum 7-hour USPAP course just to get some education on what USPAP does say. And also for us to, at executive level, maybe discuss the interpretation of USPAP and how it's being interpreted and or who is interpreting it on our enforcement staff.
Okay, there's a request to bring something to the executive committee. I certainly think we can get that on our agenda. I would make one comment. I would like, if we're going to vet it at that level, I think it's pertinent to point out that currently all 3 executive committee members are appraisers and already subject to that reg. So I'd like to get some input from those board members that wouldn't normally utilize USPAP on that time investment, but I like the idea, so I'm fine with Kristen, if you can help me be sure that gets on a future executive committee agenda item, and we'll vet it at that level. I had the agreement with Trek that I had mentioned earlier in the meeting for the MOU amendments as it related to review, and I believe Mr. Barba had a request to also consider the MOU language as it relates to the future building. Are there other items that the board would like considered for future agendas?
Madam Chair, I would like the board to consider consider our policy towards retaining the Attorney General's office at our regular board meetings and at our committee meetings. It's I think time we visit that. It's and I don't mind bringing it up. I think we have perfectly competent counsel from Attorney General's office, and we have perfectly competent in-house counsel. We should just look at the economics to see whether that's necessary to have both of them. And not by both of them, I don't mean we should fire Kristen. I mean both of them, whether we should have a second attorney at our meetings.
Okay, so let's take that up. I suppose it most naturally fits at the executive level as well. So unless some other committee wants to have some work to do, we'll be happy to take that up at the executive level. We may take it back through the budget process as well, but okay, so are there other items? I'd just like to say I appreciate the thought given to by all the board members as we look to how we formulate the future plans for the organization. So I appreciate you loading up the executive committee with work. Agenda item number 29. Is there any other action on or any other request on potential future meeting agenda items? Hearing none, we'll go to agenda item number 29, discussion and possible action to schedule future meeting dates.
Madam Chair, because I am a planner, I have already reached out to several hotels in the area, and for some reason this is booked up. I do not follow the UT football schedule. Gig 'em. However, I have a feeling there might be a football game that night or the next Saturday morning. So just put the board and maybe Dion on aware that there's very limited room availability for that Friday night.
You're speaking to the November meeting?
20th, yeah. Okay. I don't have a problem with the date, just FYI.
Okay. Anybody else have comments?
The Thursday night, the 19th, limited availability.
We certainly could consider if that becomes a problem, you know, any of the other Fridays, either the 6th or the 13th. But that's really up to you guys.
Hearing no other complaint about that date, my recommendation would be, and my hope would be, that we go ahead and reach out those that are going to need travel arrangements. Let's get in touch with staff so they know how many rooms they need to try and secure. If we can effectively secure the rooms for that date, let's leave it as is. If not, let's circulate that understanding sometime in the next 10 days so everybody can aptly adjust their schedules. So at this moment, our anticipated next meeting date will be November the 20th, pending availability. Is there any additional business for this board? Hearing none, it is now 1:35, and we'll consider ourselves adjourned.